Daniel Carter had learned to live with exhaustion. At 38, he was a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, while working long shifts as a maintenance supervisor at a downtown hospital. His life was simple: work, home, school lunches, homework, and whatever little time remained for the guitar he had played since he was a teenager. Lily was his entire world, and after losing his wife several years earlier, Daniel had promised himself that his daughter would never feel alone. That promise was the reason he rarely complained, even when bills were difficult or when exhaustion kept him awake at night. One rainy evening, Daniel brought Lily to the hospital after she developed a high fever. The doctors examined her and decided she needed to remain under observation for a few hours. Daniel sat beside her bed, holding her hand until she finally fell asleep. Around midnight, a nurse told him that Lily's room was being temporarily moved because of a problem with the heating system. Half asleep and worried, Daniel followed another nurse down a quiet hallway. He thought he had been shown Lily's new room, but in the dimly lit corridor, he misunderstood the room number and entered the wrong ICU room. Inside, a beautiful woman in her early 30s lay unconscious in a hospital bed. Her blonde hair rested neatly against the pillow, and several medical monitors surrounded her. Daniel immediately assumed it was Lily's temporary room because the lights were low and the door had been left open. He placed his guitar case on the chair, pulled the chair closer to the bed, and sat down. Only after several minutes did he realize the patient was an adult woman. Daniel stood immediately embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Wrong room." He reached for the door, but then he noticed the woman's face. She looked peaceful, but something about her expression reminded him of someone who had been fighting a battle alone. Daniel had seen many patients during his years working at the hospital. He knew the difference between someone resting and someone who seemed trapped inside their own silence. He should have left. Instead, he sat back down. "My daughter is in this hospital too," he whispered. "She's sleeping right now. I was supposed to be checking on her." The woman didn't respond. Daniel looked at the guitar case beside him. He hesitated before opening it. "My wife used to say music could reach places words couldn't." He smiled sadly. "So, maybe I'll play one song." Daniel began quietly playing his guitar. He didn't sing loudly. He simply played a soft melody he had written years earlier for Lily when she was a baby. Then he began singing gently. His voice was warm and imperfect, but sincere. The woman remained motionless. Daniel continued. "I don't know who you are," he said between verses, "but if you can hear me, don't give up. My daughter is fighting too. She needs me. Maybe somebody needs you." For the first time that night, the patient's heart monitor changed slightly. Daniel didn't notice. He continued singing. Outside the room, a nurse passing by stopped when she heard the music. She looked through the glass and immediately froze. The patient inside was not an ordinary person. Her name was Victoria Bennett, 32 years old, founder and CEO of Bennett Global, one of the most powerful technology companies in the country. 3 days earlier, Victoria had collapsed during an important business meeting. After a medical emergency, doctors had been unable to wake her. Her family had spent days beside her bed. No one had heard her respond. Yet now, as Daniel sang, her heart rate slowly changed. The nurse quietly called the attending physician. Inside the room, Daniel finished the song. He looked at Victoria. "That's all I've got," he whispered. "I hope you find your way back." He closed the guitar case and stood. At that exact moment, the doctor entered. "Sir, what are you doing here?" Daniel looked confused. "I thought this was my daughter's room." The doctor looked toward the unconscious woman and then back at Daniel. "You've been singing to Victoria Bennett?" Daniel's face went pale. "Who?" The nurse stepped forward. "Sir, this is Victoria Bennett." Daniel looked at the woman again. He had no idea that the stranger he had accidentally entered a room to comfort was one of the most powerful businesswomen in the country. He apologized repeatedly and hurried back toward Lily's room. But before he left, the monitor behind him gave another unusual signal. Victoria's fingers moved. Just slightly. The nurse saw it. And for the first time in 3 days, Victoria's family received a reason to hope. By morning, the hospital was filled with whispers. Victoria Bennett's condition had unexpectedly changed during the night. Doctors couldn't explain why, but her neurological responses had increased after the man with the guitar had sung beside her bed. Daniel knew nothing about any of it. He was sitting beside Lily, feeding her breakfast and worrying about whether she would be well enough to go home. Then 2 security officers entered the room. "Mr. Carter?" Daniel looked up. "Yes? Someone would like to speak with you." Daniel immediately became nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sir." A few minutes later, Victoria's mother entered. She was an elegant woman in her 60s, but her eyes showed exhaustion from days of fear. She approached Daniel and quietly said, "My daughter responded to your voice." Daniel stared at her. "I don't understand." "She moved her fingers while you were singing. The doctors saw changes in her brain activity." Daniel looked toward Lily. "I only sang because I thought I was in my daughter's room." Victoria's mother smiled through tears. "Perhaps you entered the wrong room for a reason." Daniel didn't know what to say. Over the next several days, doctors allowed Daniel to visit Victoria for short periods. He continued singing, always making sure not to disturb the medical staff. He talked about ordinary things, Lily's terrible jokes, his burnt pancakes, the weather, and the little garden he was trying to grow behind his house. He never talked to Victoria like she was a billionaire or a powerful CEO. To him, she was simply a person lying in a hospital bed who needed someone to remind her that the world was still waiting for her. One afternoon, while Daniel was quietly singing, Victoria's fingers moved again. Daniel stopped. "Victoria?" Her eyelids trembled. The monitor began beeping faster. A nurse rushed into the room. Daniel stepped backward. Victoria slowly opened her eyes. Everyone froze. Her gaze moved around the room before finally stopping on Daniel. Her voice was barely audible. "You sing badly." Daniel stared at her in shock. Then he laughed. "I knew you were awake." The nurse began crying with relief. Victoria's recovery took time, but she improved steadily. As she regained strength, Daniel discovered that the powerful woman everyone feared in business was, actually remarkably, humble when nobody was watching. Victoria learned that Daniel had been raising Lily alone while working at the same hospital. She was deeply moved by the way he balanced fatherhood, work, and grief without asking anyone for sympathy. One evening, Victoria asked him why he had stayed in that room after realizing he had entered the wrong one. Daniel smiled. "You looked like you needed someone." Victoria looked down. "No one had ever said that to me before." After she was discharged, Victoria returned to the hospital several times, not as a patient but as a visitor. She brought books for Lily, helped Daniel with some overdue hospital expenses, and eventually offered him a better position within her company's facilities department. Daniel initially refused the financial help, but Victoria insisted that she wasn't trying to buy his friendship. "I just want to give you the same kindness you gave me," she said. Months passed. Daniel and Victoria became close friends. Lily adored Victoria, especially because Victoria always listened to her, stories as though they were important business meetings. Daniel began to notice that his feelings for Victoria were changing, but he was afraid to say anything. Victoria felt the same fear. She had spent her life building a company and controlling every detail around her, but she had no idea how to control her heart. One evening, Daniel invited Victoria to his home for dinner. Lily had prepared a small dessert and proudly announced that it was her special family recipe. Victoria laughed as she tasted it. Daniel watched them together. For the first time in years, his house didn't feel like a place where something was missing. It felt complete. Later that night, Victoria stood on the porch with Daniel beneath the soft evening lights. "I never thanked you properly," she said. "For what?" "For walking into the wrong room." Daniel smiled. "I think that was the biggest mistake I ever made." Victoria looked surprised. Daniel continued, "Because I thought I was entering the wrong room. Turns out I was exactly where I needed to be." Victoria smiled warmly. "And what about now?" Daniel looked at her. "Now I know where I belong." Victoria reached for his hand. Neither of them needed a dramatic confession. Sometimes the most important moments begin with an accident. A simple song and a stranger who chooses to stay. Daniel had entered the wrong ICU room that night. But in doing so, he had found a woman who had been waiting to wake up. and eventually, a woman who would become part of the family he had spent years protecting. And Victoria, the powerful woman who seemed to have everything, finally discovered that the one thing money and success could never buy was the simple comfort of being loved for who she truly was.